Hi everyone, Yasas que kalosirsate to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today, I'm going to be teaching you how to make my cozy Italian beef stew. This is so good. I'm a little bit under the weather. There's something going around, and I couldn't think of anything better to make other than my chicken avgolemano soup, which I'll post down below as well. This is so good. The beef cooks nice and slow in the pot with vegetables and like a light tomato-based soup with herbs and so many flavors. It just takes a little bit of work to put everything all together, then it cooks in the pot nice and slow. And I definitely recommend that you make the biggest batch that you can because this keeps fresh in the refrigerator and it's just something that you're gonna wanna go to over and over again during the week. Let me show you how I make it. Okay, we're gonna begin by cutting up the chuck roast. So the recipe calls for 3 pounds of chuck roast, but I'm using 5 pounds today because this is what I got at the market, and I want to make a big batch of this because it keeps well in the fridge and it also tastes really good the following day and really all week long. It lasts for a really long time in the fridge. I would say up to 5 days. It's so delicious reheated anyways. I'm just going to cut the beef into chunks about this size because once you cook it, they do shrink up, and if you cook it a little bit longer and it starts to shred, you want there to be some consistency in the beef in the stew, right? So we're going to cut the beef up into chunks around this size. You can go a little bit smaller again, but I wouldn't go too smaller than this. Then I'll season the beef with salt and pepper on both sides, and I'll also dredge it with a little bit of flour on both sides. This is going to help it brown really well. It's also going to thicken the stew a little bit. If you want to keep this gluten-free, you can skip this step, and the soup is already going to naturally thicken with the potatoes that are going to go in there. This just adds a little bit more thickness and creaminess to the stew, but it can be left out without sacrificing flavor. So once the beef is done, we're just going to set that aside. Finally chop your onions. Since I'm using 5 pounds of beef, I'll use 2 medium onions. I'm just going to finely chop them. I have my big Dutch oven here heating over medium-high heat. I'll add a little bit of olive oil to it. And since I'm using a lot of beef today, 5 pounds, I'll brown this in 2 batches. So if you're using a smaller pot, still brown the beef in 2 batches, because if you add all of the beef in at once, it won't brown. It's going to start releasing liquid. So do this in several batches depending on the size pot that you're using. Brown the beef on all sides for about 5 minutes. You know it's ready once it releases from the pot. Transfer the brown beef into a bowl and then add your onion in there. So the diced onion is going in with some diced carrots. I use baby carrots today, and I just cut them up into little bite-sized pieces. I think I forgot to record that part. The onions and the carrot go in at the same time. You can season them with a little pinch of salt if you like. And we're just going to cook these for about 8 minutes over medium-low until they're nice and soft and golden. Next, I'm going to go in with the grated garlic. So 4 or 5 garlic cloves is what we're looking for. Since I grate my garlic at the beginning of the month in big batches and I freeze it and keep it in bags, I'll just break off a chunk and add it into the stew with 2 heaping tablespoons of tomato paste. We're just going to warm this through just a little bit. Then the beef is going to go back into the pot with 4 cups of beef broth. That's going to help deglaze any bits and pieces that have stuck to the bottom of the pot. 2 bay leaves are also going to go in here, 2 teaspoons of dried oregano, a heaping teaspoon of dried thyme, a teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. I'll also add 2 small cans of crushed tomatoes. Rinse the cans out with a little bit of water so we can get all the tomatoes in there. If you don't have 2 small cans and you have 1 big 28-ounce can, that's fine. I'm also going to add a tablespoon of honey to offset the acidity in the tomatoes, a little bit more salt, some freshly cracked black pepper. Get the mixture nice and hot and bring it to a boil. Reduce the heat to low, and then we're going to put the lid on and let this simmer for 1.5 hours. In that time, the beef is going to be nice and tender. In the meantime, we're going to prepare our mushrooms and our potatoes. So I'm adding mushrooms to the soup because it just adds so much flavor, and roasting them really deepens the flavor, and I'll add them in towards the end. So clean the mushrooms with a damp kitchen towel, and you can remove the stems. Either set the stems aside for another recipe, or you can put them in your compost. Thinly slice the mushrooms and transfer them to a baking pan. Drizzle the mushrooms with a little bit of olive oil, season them with salt and pepper. Toss them all around so they're perfectly coated. My oven is preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. These are going to roast on the center rack for 15-20 minutes just until they're golden and slightly caramelized. Then you're going to take them out and set them aside. And now I'm just going to prepare my potatoes. We need about 2 pounds of russet or gold potatoes. And I started off with a small bag of smaller potatoes, and then I realized that these are just going to be a pain in the butt to peel. So I switched to my bigger potatoes, peeled them, washed them really well, and then I just diced them up into medium-sized pieces just like this. These are going to stay soaking in cold water until we're ready to use them. So after an hour and a half, you're going to see that the meat is going to be nice and tender. You can go in and taste the stew at this point and add more salt and pepper if it's needed. Drain the water out of the potatoes and add them to the pot with the roasted mushrooms. You're going to want to get all those bits and pieces that are in the pan because that is flavor right there. Add a little bit more salt to this because potatoes do need salt. And my pot is literally filled to the top. I'm just going to make sure this is going to cook a little bit slower so it doesn't boil over and spill all over my stovetop. You don't have to fill the pot up as much as I did. I just want to get as much stew out of this as I can so I could have it for most of the week. Once the mixture heats up and starts to bubble, I'm going to reduce the heat to a medium-low, and this is going to cook for about 45 minutes or until the potatoes are fork tender. Once it's ready, you're going to see that there's still going to be a lot of liquid in the pot, but as it sits and cools, those potatoes are going to soak up most of the liquid, and you're going to be left with a nice thick stew at the end of it. The only thing that's left is to garnish this with some finely chopped parsley, and it's ready to serve. And there you have it. My Italian beef stew is ready to enjoy. It's comforting, flavorful, and so delicious. And it's very nutritious too because it has all those veggies in it, the herbs, and so much flavor. I love to serve this with my stuffed cheesy bread rolls. And if you haven't tried those out, definitely watch that video next if you haven't already watched it. Make it and serve them alongside the stew. It's a nice surprise to have that little bit of gooey melted cheese in there. You could dip it in the stew and it just goes together so beautifully. I hope you guys give this recipe a try. You can head on over to the website, dimitrasdishes.com, to print this recipe out. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. If you want to learn how to make the stuffed cheesy bread rolls, click over here and I'll see you right over there. Yes,